Okay, topic 1.2, systems and models. So ESS obviously uses a systems approach. It's right in the name there. The system kind of looks at inputs and outputs, but also looks at the parts that comprise that system, how those parts function, how they interact, and then kind of looking at that as a whole, right? That's kind of the ecology viewpoint. And you can kind of go from the really broad down to even more specific. Edward Abbey said, right, you could write a whole book about a single juniper tree. And ecology is the same way. You could study one tree, in its entirety. Everything is linked to everything else. Pretty obvious. So this helps us to get a holistic viewpoint, right? As opposed to just kind of taking things in isolation, we see how they're all connected and the bigger picture. So systems approaches usually use things like systems diagrams, which is really helpful to visualize sort of complex processes, kind of just see everything in front of you versus trying to read a description of how everything's happening, right? So systems will have sort of storages, right, represented by usually boxes or shapes like this, and then flows as arrows going between them. So in this case, we're seeing biogeochemical cycles here. You see flows of things like CO2. You would have another cycle for like nitrogen moving through a system, or of course, we've seen a cycle of water and how water moves through these different storages. All those are systems approaches. So we can use this in other disciplines too. Emergent properties is a really important idea here. So that's basically you get more from things working together than you would if they were separate. So you can imagine an ecosystem, right? I could take each animal in the ecosystem, I could put it each in their little box and put it all in the same room. I could even have all the plants growing there in their own little pots, but that wouldn't be the same as everything interacting together in the natural environment, right? There's more that arises by all those really complex interactions. And then, of course, we can use that at different scales, right? In the human body, going from cells to digestive systems, to the system of society, right? Even to the entire Earth as a system. So again, storages and flows. Here we have energy coming in and energy coming out, and then materials coming in and materials coming out. So this would be an open system, right? Both matter and energy coming in and out. And here we see a schematic diagram of sunlight and the process of photosynthesis, right? So some of that sunlight is actually reflected. A lot of plants in the desert actually have an additional reflective ability because the sunlight's so intense here. So they might actually reflect more than 15%. That's to help keep them a little bit cooler. So a lot of this stuff, right, you're not necessarily going to need to know the exact equation, or like that glucose is C6H12O6. However, you should know that in photosynthesis, right, carbon dioxide and water produce sugars and oxygen. The way I always remember sugars is, of course, we eat plants, and that's why they're tasty, is all the sugars. So we could have transfers of energy or matter, right? Just a change in location, or transformations, which could be a chemical change or a change in its physical state, right? So a transformation from liquid to a gas, or water freezing into a solid, or a change in energy, right? So we transform our food from a solid into energy that we use. And of course, some energy is always going to be lost due to thermodynamics, right? So I just ate a bunch of food, and the ultimate goal of that food is to create more of me, right? To build muscles and to create tissue and stuff like that. However, I'm using some of that food right now as I talk and as I breathe and as I produce heat. So we're losing energy there. Transfers are pretty simple, right? We're just relocating matter or energy. And then transformations, again, can be physical or chemical changes. Just some more systems diagrams here. Again, you can click through at your own pace if you like. Once again, open systems are exchanging both energy and matter, whereas a closed system is only exchanging energy. So in this case, the IB, they consider the Earth a closed system. Of course, the main source of energy to the Earth is Hopefully you know that's the sun. I see that question a lot. Maybe you have an ocean system. What's the main source of energy? It's the sun. Maybe you have a wetland. What's the main source of energy? Well, it's also the sun. The only system that wouldn't have the sun as main energy might be deep ocean sea vents, right, where there's no sunlight at all. So very rare cases would you not have the sun as the main energy source. You might make an argument that the Earth is an open system because sometimes asteroids will hit it. And so that's actually matter coming into the system too. But for the most part, it's closed, right? Things don't really leave the Earth. But if you look on a smaller scale, all the systems within the Earth are actually open. They're all going to be connected to each other in some manner. An isolated system is sort of a hypothetical concept, right? You could just consider the entire universe if it is a single universe, because matter or energy couldn't escape. So it doesn't exist in nature unless you just kind of consider a singular universe. So again, most systems are open systems, right? We have exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide happening in plants here. We have evaporation of water happening in the lake here. We might have an animal come and drink some of that water. We might have an animal breathe some of that oxygen and produce CO2. So it's also really helpful to produce models. So actually a systems diagram is a type of model, basically a simplified version of reality. So we can create models. We use it a lot for climate change, predicting what will happen. And the coolest part is you can put all the data that we already have into the model. And so it actually gets more accurate over time, and we can adjust it. A lot of the times they use math in these models, which, you know, isn't always so fun, but it does work super well. They're always going to involve a certain level of approximation, and therefore they can have varying levels of accuracy. A lot of times in model climate predictions, they'll actually show a scale of possible scenarios and then kind of rate the likelihood. But they're super useful in general. So again, here's some sample IB style questions. Make a systems diagram, including these components, or maybe draw a food web. What is this type of systems diagram? There's just lots of different examples. And then evaluate the use of models, right? So what are they good for? What are some downsides to them? Once again, you can find more information in the link below.